Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellency and ministers, fellow delegates. Thank you once again for your attendance, and we thank you for those introductory comments by Samashangu. And now we're going to move forward to our first panel of the day, which is energy fuels with a specific focus on coal. We have a number of good speakers to join us who are involved in different levels of the industry, from major company like Anglo-American Coal in South Africa to junior companies operating in Botswana and also in South Africa. So we're going to start by introducing the panel to you today. Our first panel member is Mr. July Ndlovu, and we welcome him, who's the CEO of Anglo Coal. July was appointed to this position in September 2016, and as we know, the Anglo Coal South Africa was until recently the largest coal producer in South Africa, but still the largest exporter. And the other major position, which is very important for our industry, that July holds, is he was appointed as chairman of the World Coal Association in July of this year, 2020. And he's been tasked with ensuring that the organization meets customer needs and stays relevant, and of course itself aligns as far as possible with the expectations of society as we're trying to move together in implementing clean technologies that can positively impact on our coal industry. Secondly, we have Mr. Louis Loubser. Welcome, Louis. He's the CEO of Mooiplaats Colliery. And he started as the head of business development and resources at Afrimat, and then he moved in 2013 as managing director of Infosource, an Afrimat subsidiary, and then in September 2018 he joined Mooiplaats Colliery as CEO, and is enjoying the challenge of building this junior coal operation. Next we have Morné du Plessis as the CEO of Minergie, the newest entrant and producer in the Botswanan coal market. Welcome, Morné. He's been unfortunately caught by the COVID-19 situation, has been locked down in Botswana for a number of months, and we're hoping that he'll be able to get home to his family soon. Morné is the CEO of Minergie Limited, which is a listed company on the Botswana Stock Exchange. He's actually a chartered accountant by trade, and with an MBA from Heriot-Watt University. So he's now cutting his teeth in starting a new mining operation, and it's had some interesting challenges, and we're looking forward to hear from him and what this has brought in the development of Minergie as we move forward. And lastly, we have Jacques Badenhorst. Welcome, Jacques. He's the CEO of Matla Energy. And Matla is also an emerging and developing coal and energy producer in Botswana. He's a metallurgist by trade. He's already involved in coal operations and processing of coal in the SADC region, and primarily in South Africa. So he's got quite a bit of experience and is now attempting to put together another new operation to tap into the major coal resources that exist in Botswana. And we thank Jacques for joining us today.
Good morning, Den. Thanks. I'm Louis Loubser, and I'm the CEO of Mooiplaats Colliery in Ermelo, South Africa.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacques Badenhorst. I'm the CEO of Matla Energy. We are developing the Mamabula coal mine in Botswana, also with an energy focus in the second phase, looking at employing clean carbon technology to produce coal to liquids and other products.
Good morning, all. My name is Morné du Plessis. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Minergie Limited. We operate a coal mine just northeast of Gaborone in Botswana.
Good morning, all. July Ndlovu. I'm the CEO of Anglo-American Coal South Africa, and also happens to be the chairman of the World Coal Association.
So without any further ado, we'd really like to move forward to the questions that we have. Maybe as a precursor to that, I can give something of an introduction. I mean, much of the world's growth over the past couple of hundred years has been due to the use of coal and an ever-increasing use of affordable energy that's been derived from fossil fuels, and that's led by coal. I mean, this affordable and predominantly coal-fueled energy drove industrial acquisition and development and has created millions of jobs over the last many, many decades and generates significant wealth. Currently, there's a great deal of discussion, primarily led by large pseudo-scientific approaches to global warming, linking coal, and this has reached a ridiculous and almost religion status, and hanging the supposed dangers of carbon dioxide gas released from fossil fuels around the world, and in particular from coal. I mean, in this context, our coal operations, our coal-fired power plants, and our coal mines have all been targeted as public enemy number one. It's been an easy target for everyone. But as we will hear from the panel today, it's not that simple, and this is a very, very complex subject. So as we move forward, we're going to address the first question that we have from the panel, and really that revolves around the role of coal in the future of energy supply, and indeed, in fact, the coal value chain.
Thanks very, very much. We take a very simple view around coal. I spoke a few weeks back about coal being a commodity that some have chosen to hate, and yet society still needs. And the reality of coal is as follows in my mind. When we talk about coal, we tend to think of coal use in terms of energy, and it's understandable in this sub-region. The things that we tend to think about are the utility power companies and the coal that they consume. What people forget when we talk coal is its use in things like steel making, its use in cement making. The point I'm making is that coal is a fundamental foundation and pillar of societal development. The infrastructure we need actually is premised on coal being used to produce things like steel and cement. As we sit today, there hasn't been an alternative found for steel making, for instance. That's the one point to make. The second point I want to make about coal and its future, specifically around energy, is that I've not seen a scenario, certainly in the next 20 to 30 years, which says there's no coal. In fact, most estimates that I see suggest that we will continue to consume a certain amount of coal. And for that reason, I think coal still has a role to play going into the future. The third point I want to make about coal, and certainly that's a point that we make eloquently as the World Coal Association, is that quite often when we talk about the narrative which says there's no future for coal, that is what I call the Western world narrative. The developing world narrative, which says we need access to cheap, reliable, readily available energy source, of which coal is readily abundantly available, actually quite often is grossly misunderstood. And if you look at where coal is growing, it is growing in the developing economies. The fourth point we make as the World Coal Association is that, in fact, if that is real, that we're going to continue to ban coal in the developing economies, it is actually quite important, therefore, that we find a route to cleaner coal. And they are there. And those routes are there. What all we are asking for is the coal value chain, from the mining all the way to utility companies, is a fair platform for our voice to be heard. This is even more important for us as developing economies, that we want to be able to develop our economies, to bring thousands and millions of our people out of poverty. And to do that, we need reliable energy. And coal is a key ingredient of that. So to do that, if we need clean coal technology, technology is going to play a significant role going forward. And therefore, what we are also saying is that as we think about investments in coal, we are asking for a level playing field where people are agnostic to technology choices. Because actually, if you don't, what is likely to happen is that people are going to continue to ban coal, will be starved of funding, and therefore may not make the critical investment that are required to tackle global emissions. So let me pause there.
So firstly, I want to second everything that July has said. I think he's done an excellent job in putting together all the positives around coal. I think firstly, the narrative around coal has been so negative, and the most important point is starving developing projects from investment because of a skewed narrative around coal. So July, thank you very much for that. 100% on board with you with regard to that. In terms of how it's going to be rolling out in terms of developing economies, we all know that, as July said, the view on coal is westernized. We have to look at our own continent, excuse me, Africa, that, for example, is also one of the developing continents in the world. There's 620 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. So the numbers just is mind-boggling to force some kind of other model than the cheaper form of fossil fuel to be utilized for a developing country like that. We speak about economies like India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, and even to a certain degree China. That's all heavily reliant on the cheapest source of coal. So I do support that view. There's a lot of coal to be had, and then I believe Africa has got a role to play in terms of providing that coal. We, from a Botswana perspective, and Jacques can confirm this, is that we have more than 200 billion tons of coal available in Botswana that's just sitting in the ground, so that can be utilized. We know that there's just been a listing just recently from a project in Zimbabwe where there's 1 billion tons of coal available. So, Africa needs the coal, developing countries need it, and I believe Africa's got a very important role to play in that.
Yeah, thanks. I think this also links into what July has also said, that for our coal industry to survive and to actually move forward and not to be starved of any investments going forward, especially for new developers, is that we need to think differently in terms of diversifying, not only being coal miners, but maybe becoming end users as well. So from our perspective, in terms of Matla, we believe that yes, you need to have a route to market and entry in terms of coal sales into various markets, such as size coal, the Eskom markets, the Sasol markets, and then also future export markets out of Botswana via the Waterberg rail link. But I think it's also imperative to not only just supply coal, but also to actually develop projects such as what we are planning in terms of coal to liquids in Botswana on a smaller scale, not the conventional Sasol type of big, huge investment type of projects, but also on smaller scale, modular scale, where the technology is available and it's commercially being implemented. And I think just thinking differently about it and doing more than one product. So producing a diesel for local consumption. We all know that all of the fuel that's being used in Botswana is being imported from South Africa. So we believe there's an opportunity to produce our own fuel within Botswana, and then also to produce other products such as fertilizers, utilizing existing technology, which also complements carbon capture, power generation on site, in terms of not being always connected to grids, and thus in that way reducing carbon footprint and becoming carbon neutral. So from that perspective, I believe coal producers might have to change their point of view in the next coming years in terms of actually investing in clean coal technology as well.
I think that's by far the more difficult is to predict the market. But if you look at all the other commodities that has recovered, i.e. copper, yet copper went from $6,000 to almost $4,000 per ton, and it recovered in 6 weeks from just under 5,000 to 6,000, based on a fundamental undersupply in the market. So yes, there are significant role players that's going to drop off the grid that cannot survive at existing rates, but for how long? The current API4 price isn't helping anyone, and it's not sustainable, and it's not feasible for even the big players to expand and grow a new market. So I can only predict that I'm hoping for for a quicker recovery, and we're all anticipating that it's a quicker recovery. But I think where I'd like to tie in with, I mean, all the speakers, the coal that South Africa exports is primarily, my understanding, goes to India. And in the Indian market, it's in the steel industry, not the power industry. So they cannot survive without our quality. So we're hoping for a quick recovery there, that it goes to recover. The API 4 price recovers more quickly. But I think what I'd like to add, in my mind, the coal industry is the equivalent of the Kodak moment, where Kodak had access to digital cameras, but they stuck to film back in the day. And every industry comes to that point where they need to make a decision. But the point is, there's so much other use for coal that, yes, we look at power, but if you look at the steel and the cement industries and the fertilizer, liquid, etc., that coal role players have to invest in the alternative use of the product, etc., that you're not stuck that in 20 or 30 years time you're at a cliff. So I think we all agree the long term of coal is dead. And when I say long term, that is most likely in excess of 30 years. But we don't know. Technology changes so quickly. But I really like what Jacques is saying. We have to invest in alternatives to make this feasible, and also give developing countries the opportunity to develop on a cheap power basis and not an expensive basis that they cannot afford.
Thanks very much, Louis, for those comments. You know, in a similar alignment to that, I'd like to come back to you, Louis, if I may, for the second question. And that is, you know, really to address, I mean, there's this thought process going on that coal, or the use of coal, let's put it that way, in fact has some form of expiry date at some time in the future. But given that there's clear evidence that the use of coal is increasing, in particular in the lesser developed parts of the world, such as Africa and Southeast Asia, what are your comments about that? Do you really believe that coal has an expiry date?
Talking about the expiry date, I think is irresponsible, given what the World Coal Association that July has pointed out. The horizon is set. What we don't know is how far that horizon is for coal, but the alternative use, etc. If you look at what is happening in oil and going from oil to gas, that's been a transition for the last 20 years. And yes, it will pick up momentum based on the funding requirements and or the feasibility of the project. I think the opportunity is when you look at bubbles, be it a property bubble, or in South Africa there was an exotic game bubble, where the project or the product is based on unrealistic market demands. If I look at the property market of South Africa post or early 2000s, that kept on growing, and everything said this isn't sustainable, and eventually the property market in South Africa collapsed. There's also global examples, the same with the exotic game. There was no fundamental for the exotic game industry in South Africa to continue growing. But that is fundamentally different in coal, because when you look at all the applications of the product, barring thermal coal, we are in for coal for the next 20, 30 years. If my information is correct, there are still coal-fired power stations being built in India and also China. So when you look at it, the point is probably to start preparing for an exit of coal as an energy source that could be anything from 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I think the point is one has to be, as a coal role player, evaluate your options. Your options are alternative energy, and ultimately we are an energy source of sort. So looking at a deadline for coal, I think that would be very unrealistic to say or predict the end of coal, because coming back to the statement made earlier, the developing world needs access to energy. And at this stage, the only energy is coal. So I think it is probably safe to say that for the next 20 to 30 years, coal will be around until we provide better technology or more sustainable technology at better rates. Coal is the energy of choice for the developing world. But in saying that, one as an industry role player also needs to look at alternative options for the use of the product and or investment opportunities as an energy source.
I guess rather than think of the expiry date for the commodity, what we should be thinking about the transitions for uses of the commodity rather. Because I think the two are not one and the same thing. And I think Louis is right that, what we're talking about is maybe reduced use of coal in energy generation, but there could be other uses. So let me give you a couple of observations and insights on some of the developments that we see. If you look at some of the technology development, like for instance, on the integrated combined cycle coal gasification, which is done to actually produce hydrogen, okay? There are people who are beginning to say, well, actually coal is a cheaper source of hydrogen than hydrolyzers. We're actually using electricity to generate hydrogen. So if we think about the hydrogen economy, actually coal could play a significant role. And the technology is there. And those are new opportunities for uses of this very same commodity. If you think about some of the work countries like Japan, Australia are beginning to think about in terms of alternative uses of coal. In fact, there's a group called Coal Innovators who are beginning to look at whether we can convert coal to produce fertilizers. And again, those are technologies that are possible. So in my mind, rather than think about the expiry date of coal, I tend to think about transitions for the uses of the commodity. And I think for the informed investor, you could still invest in this commodity, but in very different uses going into the future.
Yeah, as Louis said, it's difficult to put a horizon onto it. I think one of the issues that July raised earlier, which I think is a very valid point, is you need to look at the infrastructure and the value chain behind the coal industry. Okay, we can all sit here and say coal has got an end date of X, but what about the cement producer, as rightly has been pointed out? Okay, they've got certain technologies that they're applying today to dry the cement. They're going to have to, there's going to have to be a complete rethink here. So you can't look at coal in isolation and make that the bad boy. We have underlying industries depending on coal. They've got technologies currently that will have to change significantly. If we look at the regional industrial market that we supply the coal into, every factory still makes use of a boiler. So the capital investment to change that technology, to remove coal from that and do it cheaper, I think that the answer is not on the expiry of coal. I mean, coal is enough resources to carry on beyond 30, 40, 50 years. That's not the point. I'm concerned about the impact it has on the industry down the line. If coal is removed, what is that effect on the cement producer, the steel maker, the guy that's a canner? They still use product in hospitals and prisons to provide heat and steam. So, yeah, I think it's a bigger question than coal disappearing off the radar. And I think we need to look at it in that context rather than just saying coal must end or coal has got an end date. So it's a very difficult question, Clay.
Yeah, look, I think I agree with all the panelists. I'll go beyond what Monet is saying. I think coal hasn't got an end date, to be quite honest. Certainly reducing in footprint with regards to electricity generation. But one has to look at it from a point of view as well that, everybody's saying that we move away to renewables, but how sustainable are these renewables? We're seeing daily in terms of Australia and California that the base load is not there, and it creates problem for those economies. So I think, yes, we've got to accept the fact that we need to do something about CO2 emissions, and I think there is technology, to address that. However, we all talk, we don't do, and I think we need to actually collaborate and actually, as a coal industry, collaborate and make sure that we do that. And I think that's the only thing that will change the sentiment towards coal in terms of investment. From a use consumption point of view, I think beyond 30, 40 years from now, you're still going to be consuming a similar amount of coal than you're doing now, although the percentage going into power generation is going to be less and there'll be more renewables. So yeah, I think coal has still got a very bright future, but we need to do something from our perspective in terms of ensuring that it is still sustainable going forward. From a developing country point of view, we all know that how do you develop a country? How does the economy grow? The economy grows on the backbone of infrastructure. That infrastructure is related to cement, steel, communication lines, and that's the only way these economies will be able to grow. And coal is the backbone of it as well.
Look, I just wanted to make one more point about this debate about the end of coal. And I agree with all the other speakers that said talking about the end of coal is end date is probably not a very useful debate to have. This debate usually is informed and is something that comes together with ESG, right? And I always find this notion fascinating because, so the ESG is environmental, social, and governance. And the reason why coal will end is all the issues around environmental. What about the social? So here are the facts. The coal industry globally employs about 6 million people. Another 6.5 million people are employed in the steel industry. 2 to 3 million are employed in the cement industry. I haven't counted the support industries like explosives, like technology suppliers, and that sort of thing. I haven't even included in this instance the utility companies. Who talks about the social impact of just wishing that one day coal disappears? What happens to these 20, 30 million people whose livelihoods depend on this value chain? What replaces it? I've heard the debate about no renewables would do the same. In fact, there's a very interesting case study done by the International Partnership on Climate Change on what it would take for California to go to zero fossil fuels, and the amount of overinvestment in capacity they would require to deal with the renewables intermittency. And by the way, it doesn't create as many jobs as everyone says it does. So I think this debate has to be balanced beyond all the things we've just said about infrastructure and so forth and so on. If you want to think about this from an ESG point of view, even more relevant in a country like ours, South Africa, where 80,000 people are employed directly in the coal industry, it's a significant foreign currency earner. Let's not talk about whether we even have the national balance sheet to replace every thermal power station that Eskom owns tomorrow with renewables. We simply can't do it. We cannot wish it away. So I think the notion that it's got an end date is a very useful anti-coal narrative to have, but it's not based in reality or facts from where I stand.
Just, out of the comments that you've all made now on this question of the expiry date, it's quite clear to me that, this whole issue of the coal value chain is really one that we need to probably dive into a little bit deeper, not only just today, but I mean, as we go forward and in promoting our industry, which, is definitely under promoted. What's your feeling around the whole issue of environmental and social governance? I mean, that's clearly an issue that we don't talk about too much in coal, but there are some impacts there. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, look, I think Mornay will share my sentiment here. It's not easy getting a new mine off the ground. It's definitely, we're seeing it every day with regards to numerous commercial banks not funding any coal developments or coal-related developments. We're seeing, entities like Development Bank of South Africa refusing even to fund infrastructure projects such as railway lines that is predominantly linked to obviously transport coal. So it's becoming more difficult every day as we're carrying on. Insurance companies are pulling out of actually supplying insurance to coal mines. So yes, becoming very difficult. I see it in the going future that coal producers that are currently in the market will be able to expand utilizing cash flow. I think coal is still an entity that drives revenue, especially in South Africa, and there is money to be made in coal. However, reinvestment into new coal projects is crucial for the demand that is going to be there for the next 20, 30 years. So yeah, we need to be thinking out the box as well with regards to funding these projects. A very limited amount of debt suppliers, a very limited amount of equity suppliers, and most of the ones that are currently available in terms of debt supply are also the development countries, that are focused on developing countries, such as Bank of China providing debt financing, African Export-Import Bank, which is obviously focused in development in Africa, that will supply debt funding. On the equity side, extremely limited. You have a niche Asian private equity firms that might contribute a bit of equity, but all the big guys are actually moving away from equity stakes. So you'll find a few traders, coal traders, that will provide equity, but mostly the funding for coal mines nowadays are from equipment suppliers, contractors such as mining contractors that will supply or supply the capital for box cuts, and also processing plant fabricators that will supply capital in terms of doing the processing plants. So yeah, there is money available, but it's limited to the coal industry itself.
So Glenn, I agree with Jock's summary there. It's very difficult for a startup junior miner to obtain any finance. The commercial banking routes have been blocked because of sentiment that I've shared with you earlier. So the first thing that you have to deal with is negative sentiment. Secondly, in terms of commercial banking, if you don't have a track record of 12 plus months of profit history or 3 years of trading, nobody's looking at you. I mean, you look at even the development banks are asking these questions. So where do you go to? So it makes it very difficult. You need to look at two specific areas. The one is in our case specifically, and it's relevant to Botswana, is Botswana's got to make a fundamental call in terms of diversifying the economy. So the country as a whole must buy into the coal industry, which they have. So you will find that in Botswana specifically, there's a bit more support for the development of the coal industry. So their quasi-financial institutions that are run by themselves will be available to provide you with funding, although it's very expensive. It comes with very onerous conditions, but at the end of the day, it is available. So that's on the one hand, that it's quite important that you do that. I also believe there's an opportunity, like Jacques has mentioned, specifically the big traders that are looking at their future supply. Where is their future supply coming from? And the coal industry maybe needs to look within to solve its funding issues. You know, you can have your big traders and so forth looking at various reserves and saying, you know, we need to tie down a reserve going forward, and you can obtain, in terms of those type of offtake agreements or equity arrangements, something for the future. So there is opportunities, but as Jacques said, it's extremely limited. You need to find the right investor that's got the right risk appetite for this, and they're not going to be scared of the negative sentiment that's falsely surrounds the coal industry.
I guess if you just listen to what we've just been told, it talks to two things in my view. One, that slowly we're creating a monopoly of funding, of sources of funding. There will be somebody out there, whether that's a trader or that's a private equity investor, who says, I am prepared for the kind of return I can get and the risk I'm prepared to invest in coal. But the fewer they become, the more costly that funding is going to be. Here is the reality: if that happens, the consumer is going to pay eventually. And it just goes counter to everything that we want to do as society. In particular, if you think about it from the UN Sustainable Development Goals point of view, energy is such an essential underpin. So to start with funding actually is counterproductive. But that's part of the work that we need to do as the World Coal Association. The second development that I wanted to just highlight is when you think about funding going into the future, is this dichotomy between the guys in the pinstripes who have become actually the anti-coal activists today. I mean, these are the guys in the banks who now say, we will not put money into coal. But which coal are they talking about? Because are they talking about all coal? Are they talking just about thermal coal? And what is the difference from an emissions point of view? And I think beginning to have this honest conversation that creates a level playing field is important. That's one. Secondly, quite often when we talk about investment in coal, what we're talking about is investment in mines. And yet the core value chain is much more than the mines. It is the infrastructure, whether that's rail or ships, and all the support services that go with it. It is the utility companies that actually burns the coal. It is the cement factories. It is the steel plants that actually consume that coal. I've always wondered, and I had a discussion with one leading bank when they said, we'll not put money into coal. And I said, do you realize what you're excluding yourselves out of? And when we had this discussion that I'm describing on all the other infrastructure related in the support industries, he said, no, but we never thought about it. We're just thinking about thermal coal. So I think that's a debate that society needs to have to be better informed. In fact, we in the World Coal Association call that raising the society's IQ on coal, because I think we need to be clear and share the right amount of information to ensure that the right investment decisions can be made. I don't think it's sustainable to continue on this path. And I think the guys who said the coal industry has to transform and reinvent itself are absolutely right. And it can, because coal can become cleaner. So let me give you a good example. In fact, the IEA used this example a lot. If you converted all the thermal power stations that are not on high efficiency, low emission technology today to high efficiency, low emission, which is existing technology, right? You could reduce the amount of CO2 emissions that are equivalent to all the emissions that India is emitting today. And this is on existing technology, proven technology. We're not even talking about inventing the technology. So the idea that we should starve the coal industry and its value chain of investment, in my view, is actually counterproductive to the very same noble goals of climate change that we're all trying to pursue. In fact, I suspect we don't always locate this debate in facts. So if you look at the Paris commitments and the NDCs done by the different countries, you'll be amazed the number of countries who themselves still include coal in their energy mix going forward and say, actually, we're going to invest in clean coal technology to be able to reduce our emissions. And if those are aspirational national goals that will help the world to fight climate change, I think it just says, actually, we need to find sources of funding to be able to continue to do that. So the case I'm arguing here is that we shouldn't always look at the case for investment in the coal value chain as building mines. Because actually, I think it's Jacques who said so. I think the existing mines generally will find enough cash flows from what they're doing. But where we need the investment critically is in use of energy efficiently. And we can't stop that. Because if we do that, that's just counterproductive. And my own hypothesis is, I think over time, we will coalesce towards actually what we need to do as society, as humankind, to actually deliver our climate change goals.
I think my fellow presenters have touched, I think, on everything. I think at the bottom case is supply and demand. Yes, corporate money can exit, but it will be replaced by a trader, an end user, or opportunistic fund. So I think funding new opportunities is exceptionally difficult, as pointed out, but you cannot stop the supply of funding for existing opportunities, and most likely it will be replaced. And that's what we are seeing. If you look at the amount of financing being provided by the big traders of the world, it's already replicating or duplicating the older system. So I think as far as supply and demand goes, it will just be a shift change from going from a corporate bank to alternative funder.
I'd like to just turn our focus now to something that's affected all of us, not only our industry as coal and energy, but everyone. But it would be interesting, I think, for the delegates of the conference and everyone watching this to understand and realize what have the challenges been related to the COVID-19 pandemic and how we've reacted to it and how we've managed the situation that it's created. So I'd like to start off with you, July, if I can, and for you to, try and express for us what it's meant for Anglo Coal, sort of actions you've taken, and if possible, what leadership and other lessons, if any, that have emerged from this crisis.
Yeah, I guess the global pandemic has taught us some very useful lessons, some of them very hard. Firstly, nobody had a pre-defined plan on what to do. We've had to learn our way forward. But I think some realities became quite clear in our minds. Was right at the start, we decided what we needed to do was to prevent infections in our mines. And we changed fundamentally all the work practices that we've got in our mines. Of course, the mining industry in South Africa is well placed for that, partly because safety and health has always been a significant and intrinsic part of the way we manage our operations. So that's something that allowed us to respond and respond with speed. But once the infections were here, therefore prevention became not the issue, but actually how do we respond to the infections that we've got? And we did some really amazing work. One of the things that you learn very quickly is this complex relationship between a mine and the community that it serves. In a lot of places, not just in South Africa, I suspect would be the same in Botswana or anywhere in the sub-region, or in fact, in most places. Mines are in remote locations. They are providers of infrastructure, whether that's water, power, schools, roads, and close. In fact, in some instances, they even provide jobs, not just for the employees in their own mines, but for service providers who support those mines. So shutting down the mines when lockdowns came is not the easiest thing to do. What we learned is that the debate about lives and livelihoods and this polarity which says it's one or the other is actually a misplaced debate. You have to look after both because lives matter, but actually having their livelihoods is just as important. What you can't have is a situation where people have no water, or in fact, they have no wherewithal to buy food. So our response was geared towards making sure that we can manage and protect the integrity of our operations so that we can continue to provide the livelihoods whilst at the same time managing the health impacts on our employees. And one of the things that we did as Anglo is something that we call We Care. We ended up with a program that allowed us to actually deploy our own COVID testing stations to ensure that we could identify people who were infected, and we could actually proactively remove them from where they could infect other people, and that worked exceptionally well. But over and above that, the amount of support we provided to the communities, whether it was providing them with water, food parcels, we helped schools where kids could no longer go to school with computers to ensure that they could learn from home. We have done so much more to ensure that communities could continue with their livelihoods. The one last big lesson we learned and probably a lesson I learned as a leader, was that when you go through a pandemic like this, we all go through this in very different places, and it affects us very differently. So think about it this way. There are people who are just afraid of getting infected. They have not been infected. But actually, fundamentally, that fear actually affects them very deeply. It could be because, my son was going to have a wedding this year, or my son is going to school. Now I'm so afraid that he's never going to finish. That I take to the workplace with me. Then there's another grouping of people who themselves have lived through the trauma of this pandemic. They've either been infected or actually are living with the infection or have recovered. And that pain and that fear is not something that you can describe for anybody. In fact, one of our employees shared her story, and what she said changed it for me forever. And she told of a story when she got tested positive. She was isolated for 2 weeks. When she got back, her office was exactly as she left it. No one wanted to touch it. In fact, no one wanted to talk to her. This stigma, we thought HIV had a stigma, but this actually is something so much more, because people just felt I'll be infected. Then we have obviously a third group of people who have lost a loved one or a colleague, and what they're just going through in terms of bereavement, and yet their limitations of what they could do is something that, again, is so different. The fourth lesson we learned was, I never thought we could manage our businesses as remotely as we've been successfully been able to do. Over the last 5 months, I've run the business from my house. I haven't been to our offices. Yes, I've been to the mines, but we can do that successfully. But what new culture are we creating? What workplace are we creating? And what does it call upon for me as a leader to do, to be able to connect at a meaningful level with employees, to ensure that they actually know that I deeply care, even though I don't see them daily? It's been a real change for all of us. But I must say that as a company, I've been very proud to be part of a group of leaders who have brought to meaning and life what it means to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. And some of the things that we've been able to do have been amazing.
So I appreciate where July is coming from, in a very well-established organization that's got access to resources and so forth. So 100% supporting what he's saying there. In context of a startup business, a junior miner just starting out, the pandemic has been, it wipes out businesses. That's what it does. And I hear the argument about livelihood and lives, but specifically in our small little industry on our side in Botswana, the impact on the business is more than the people that you employ. It is the village that July refers to. The village comes to a complete standstill. When the mine opens, peripheral businesses start up. There's little spaza shops, there's a haircutter, all these type of things. All these things disappear. One as an entity feels that specific responsibility to do that. So you do the best you can in terms of food parcels, supplying and what you can, but it doesn't help. It's a small droplet in the ocean. So that's the one very sad thing. That's specifically if you don't have access to resources, that makes it very difficult for you. I think a lesson that we've learned is that business can be done differently. July is referred to doing things all on various of these platforms over the internet. We've learned that we can do business in any place at any time, and you can relook at the way that you schedule meetings. A lot of time goes to waste in meetings where I believe these electronic platforms has actually enhanced a lot of the decision making that we've done. It's also allowed you to be in contact with all your service providers and so forth. I think the other lesson that we've learned is that you become complacent and you take things for granted. A simple thing like cross-border transport and access to logistics is a standard day-to-day thing that when economies are running open, you assume that these things work. The impact that has on collecting product, getting it back to your end user, you know, where it used to take 24 hours, now it takes 5 days. It's significant. So, you know, quite difficult. We're not going to see the end of COVID-19's impact for a long time. That's the concern I've got. You know, there may be a relaxation of all the protocols around what you can and can't do, but the effect on businesses is going to be felt long into next year, and that's the loss of businesses and so forth. So we'll have to see how this goes. Everybody positions themselves. Again, you know, coming back to my pet hate, which is funding. Unfortunately, again, in terms of this, where you have governments putting COVID-19 assistances in place and so forth, again, there's hurdles being put in place for you to achieve that. So I don't believe that COVID-19 discriminates against any business. If you a strong Anglo-American, or you are a small little manager that's trying to start their business up, or you trying to find your way in the world like Matla is, it affects all the businesses the same. So unfortunately, the way that, you know, COVID assistance is applied doesn't follow that route, and that's been a disappointing part for me. But you know, as I said, the biggest lesson learned here is you take things for granted. You're going to have to, you know, simple things are becoming very difficult, and that's what you have to pay attention to daily in your management time.
Glenn, I think maybe the question is not directed correctly towards me, as we're not in production at this point in time. However, I think from a perspective in terms of execution, we need to reassess when do we actually break ground, and when do we start constructing, and when do we go into production, you know, to minimize the effects of COVID. However, in my other business, we are involved in coal processing on one of the mines that supply Eskom, and we've been running 24/7, obviously putting protocols in place, but we were classified as essential services and then obviously supplying to Eskom. So that was positive, and we were not as affected as numerous other people were. So for that, we were blessed.
Yeah, I think we immediately started with training protocols or interventions before the lockdown. Us being a very small operation, you've got the ability to react quickly. But the problem with the COVID influence is the double-edged sword. The one being our ability to assist the local community, the local role players, and also surviving as a company. Currently, the pricing is under our break-even point, and we cannot survive, which makes it exceptionally difficult. Everyone looks at a different model, looks at different outlets to sell locally, but that is probably a common challenge globally, not only for South Africa in terms of being an exporter. Yeah, it's been exceptionally difficult. I think we felt the pain of the local economy, being the taxi association that's contacted us, from the local ward councillors that's contacted us. So yeah, the impact has been severe, and the problem is the knock-on effect. For how long that impact will last, we don't know. But yeah, it's been exceptionally difficult to manage as a company, as a financial return, and also looking after your own people in the economy and the local areas around you. Yeah, it's been challenging.
Thanks to all of you. I mean, clearly the pandemic has had a significant impact, but the way that we as an industry, as coal people, as teams have risen to the challenge is really amazing. And I think given that coal got the status of being a special industry and required to generate energy, was fortunate for us. Many of our mining colleagues haven't had the same privileges and were shut down summarily for much longer periods of time. So we certainly have had our blessings, but wonderful stories, and thanks for that, guys. I'd like to move on to a final question really for the panel now. And this really focuses around, you know, the achievements of each of your companies and businesses, you know, during the course of this year. It's been a tough year, and I'm aware that financial years are different for each of us, but it would be interesting to hear, you know, what are the successes that you've had. Well, let's start with you, Morné, please.
we have our financial year ending in June. So June 2020, it's just the other day. So that was our first financial year that we had an operating mine. So that's a significant achievement for us. You know, within 12 months after getting our licensing, we developed a mine and started producing product. We were extremely proud of that, sending product out of Botswana in significant quantities into the Southern African market. So, you know, very proud with regard to being able to do that, being blessed to get enough equity and debt funding for the time being. Was also very good for us so that we could develop the project where we are. The project is now in a position that it can go into you know, what we call our next phase. But again, this is all timed based on the impacts of COVID and the recovery of the market. As Louis has mentioned, where API4 is running at the moment, that doesn't even help the domestic market where we putting our product into. So there's some challenges, and we're hoping for the recovery of that market. But surviving COVID-19 in inverted commas for the time being, we're very pleased about that, being in operation, and then also being able to evacuate product, not just by road, but also by rail into South Africa, you know, quite a pleasing achievement for us. So very happy that the mine is operating now, and looking forward to the future.
Thanks. I think it's quite hard to find any positives during this time, but I think we do have a couple. We've made quite a lot of progress with regards to, you know, in terms of final designs, and we've actually started fabricating the processing plant, although we still haven't got a mining license, and it just shows our commitment in terms of the project going forward. We did get a letter of comfort from the Ministry of Botswana that we've complied to all requirements in terms of getting a mining license, except for equity funding, which is a requirement under Section 39 that you need at least 25% equity. So I think Botswana is quite, you know, obviously serious in terms of getting the coal industry going. However, they've also learned lessons in terms of issuing mining licenses and people hoarding licenses and not developing projects, and they're scared, you know, to walk that same path with new developers. So from that perspective, we're quite happy that we've complied with everything, and that's a positive. We are in negotiations and going through due diligences with a couple of interested parties, mostly big traders. We have also got expression of interest of very large quantities, you know, from large traders, and we're already planning the secondary mine. So from that perspective, we've seen a lot of buy-in from Botswana Development Corporation, from TFR, from Botswana Rail, in terms of the proposed Waterberg rail link, and we believe that we are moving towards successfully, you know, implementing that project within the next 2-3 years with all relevant parties and stakeholders such as Minergie, MDCB, Rapuli Coal, Botswana Potash, all contributing to volumes to support the business case. And I think that is positive.
Yeah, I think any achievement during the year was overshadowed by the whole COVID experience of internationally. But I think the one thing we did in our lockdown, we re-evaluated every single step of our process and how we do things, and we managed to post our lockdown improve our productivity significantly, which was very satisfying to see. We took the time to plan and redesign and focus on the way things should happen versus how we did things. But I think the biggest company, during the lockdown, we started up in April, and we contemplated a temporary close down for care and maintenance given the low export pricing. And our workforce actually volunteered to work at their own risk, and we could pay them at a rate that we could afford when we could pay them. So I think our achievement in saying that, our achievement was to build a culture of trust, that the guys were actually willing to come to work without having a guaranteed salary and proposing it as the ideal solution. So we were very proud of that achievement.
That's okay. For us, the number of achievements are even in the middle of such a difficult period and the darkness and the stress and how we all felt as a country, as a business, they've been things we've done well and are quite proud to have done well. I know I make this point about these lives and livelihoods, and I'm probably make it lightly, but it has been a profound issue for us. Because of the prevention and response strategies that we put in place, touchwood, thus far, despite the number of infections we've had, we've not had a single employee who passed away. In fact, to put it in context, we reopened our hospital, which we had closed, re-kitted it for COVID cases. And actually, because of the strategies that we put in place and our management tactics, we haven't been able to hospitalize a single employee as a consequence, which is quite an important achievement for us. Working together with the regulator, we were able to keep our mines running throughout the lockdown period. So yes, we did get some of the employees to stop working, but one of the things that we're quite proud of when I talk about balancing lives and livelihoods is that despite the fact that people were not working, we kept paying them throughout the period. And that's something that we as a company are quite pleased that we're able to do. What am I saying is that actually we were able to play our role as a responsible citizen. We donated millions of PPE to the Department of Health to try and assist the frontline workers. Again, continue to play our role. That's something that we feel very good about. The second point I want to make, which I think for me, and I think Jacques made a very valid point when he said, this pandemic has destroyed businesses. And it has the potential to destroy businesses. The fact that we actually have emerged through this pandemic and its effects with our assets remaining competitive in itself is something that we feel pretty good at. I think we've managed fairly well throughout the period. The other thing we've done, which we're quite proud of, is the support we gave to the small businesses that supply to our business. Because actually this was quite important to us to ensure that not only are we trying to support our employees, our communities, but the guys whose businesses actually are dependent on us. We needed to make sure that we take them with us. Whether we needed to change the payment attempts to ensure that they could keep their businesses running, we did that. And by and large, we have been fairly successful in terms of doing that. So what am I saying? I think for us, it was really about how do we ensure that we take our employees, our communities, our suppliers, and our customers with us until we get to the other end of this pandemic. We know we're towards the end, and we're going to continue to reinvent ourselves on a day-by-day basis. Thank you.
Well, it's clear to me that despite the challenges we've had in 2020 and the latter part of 2019, when of course COVID-19 really emerged, the achievements you've had have been quite significant. So well done to all of you. So as we move forward from this, and clearly, you know, the pandemic is not yet over, or at least the impacts of the pandemic are there for all to see, and I'm sure we're going to live with them some time to come. What are your final thoughts, guys? What can you offer?
So I believe that, you know, in terms of the flavor of the discussion that we've had, it's quite clear that coal has got a important role to play in the world. Although it's misunderstood, it's got that important role to play. We are not, as a coal industry, and I hope I can speak for my colleagues here, against renewables. The point has been made earlier in the discussion that a balance has to be had between the two. You need the cheapest form of fuel to carry the base load, as Jacques has mentioned, and that's you know, quite important that we find that midway. Do we have a responsibility as a coal industry to be more responsible in terms of becoming greener ourselves and decrease our carbon footprint. Of course we do. I think there's ways and means that, as July has mentioned, that even through the value chain, we can decrease that footprint. So I think there's a responsibility on us to do that, make use of the technologies that are available. Also, I believe that the coal industry needs to stop feeling sorry for itself. We need to stand up for ourselves. Coal is very important. It's developed the Western world. We can be proud of that. And it's the same thing for developing countries. I want to close off by saying that I think in terms of the potential that Botswana has and their coal industry to contribute to not just Southern Africa, but Africa and world coal is significant. I call on all role players to start acting, develop their resources. We ask government and the relevant parties to develop the infrastructure like the Mamabula-Lephalale link so that coal can be exported out of Botswana. So great future for Botswana and the coal industry. It will do wonders for Botswana as a country to diversify the economy. So very happy to be in Botswana, be part of this. And long live coal. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, Monet, you summed it up quite nicely, but I'd like to obviously support you guys as well in Botswana. I think you guys have done a tremendous job in terms of what you've achieved. And certainly, we also believe quite strongly in Botswana. We know the coal is there. I think just maybe in comparison, if you look at the Waterberg coal versus the coal in Botswana, the Grootegeluks and the Resgens of the world, you're looking at a 40 to 45% yield. And across the Limpopo, which is less than 20 kilometers away, you've got the Mamabula coal fields where we situated, and we're running at anything between 70 and 90% yields of export quality coal. You know, so it's only separated by a mere couple of kilometers of rail or road that needs to be implemented. And certainly we will play a role in terms of doing so. But yes, I also think Botswana's got a lot of potential with regards to being landlocked, not only for export coal in terms of what will be made possible through the Waterberg-Lephalale link, but also in terms of new and other markets within other developing countries such as Zambia and DRC and so forth. And, you know, Botswana have actually close to completion is the Kazungulu Bridge. And as soon as that railway link is also completed between Francistown and Kazungulu, you know, that will be the shortest route via South Africa and port access for other materials to be actually, you know, have a significant trade within the SADC region. So we honestly believe that Botswana is the next place to be, especially in terms of meeting the growing demand and the shortfall that we believe is going to emanate out of South Africa over the next 10 years.
As an industry, we need to go from a reactive approach to a proactive approach in sharing facts to be able to influence discussions on an objective manner. I think it's very easy to sit on the side and listen to what is said about the industry, the way forward. And we've heard today that there's a significant of other uses of coal and impacts of coal as an industry. I think typically operational individuals are more focused on getting the job done than selling the job. I think that is something that us as an industry can do. And I think secondly, it's just to start focusing on the future. It's easy to delve on the past and think on what went wrong. I think we are where we are, and we just need to buckle it down and to focus on the return of the market, because with all likelihood, it will happen sooner rather than later, and start focusing on how we can influence the future.
So I want to do two things. One, to give you a couple of thoughts, and secondly, finish off by a commercial for the World Coal Association. So the first one, I think we all agree coal is the future. If you want to develop an energy advantage as a nation, strategically, I think coal is going to be a significant part of that. Even if you wanted to enable the revolution called green energy, you're going to require that base load, and coal can provide a far more cost-effective, reliable base load for you actually to develop your energy advantage, and the transition to green is required. What I want to say really is that when we talk coal, we should move beyond just talking about coal producers. And of course, when we gather like this, we tend to talk about as coal producers. But actually, coal is more than just coal producers. It is the coal value chain. It is the players between the coal and the end market. It is the governments whose interest in the future is dependent on providing reliable access to their people. The reality for us, all of us, whose future is dependent on coal, is that the anti-coal coalition is organized, it's vocal, it's well funded. We can get into conferences like this and say, yeah, coal has got a future and it's bright, but actually the opposition is far more stronger than we think. It used to be a student at a university who jumped up and down and said, we're demanding that you clean the future. It moved into governments, but today the regulator, the most effective regulator, as you have heard from all of us, is the guy in the pinstripe suit in an investment bank who carries no real authority other than to say that I will not give you money to carry out your business. That's the threat that we see and face as a core value chain. What we need to do is to speak with conviction, but go beyond just speaking, but provide proof points that the things that we're saying that coal can become cleaner are real. Because the only way society will believe us is when they see us do the things that we are saying. But lastly, as the core value chain players, we can only be strong if we stick together and we speak with one voice. I'm not always sure that we're doing that today. And if we don't get ourselves organized and stand together, I think as a core industry and a core value chain, we face an existential threat, and it's real. And yet the opportunities are just as big as you have had. The developing countries where coal is being used, is needed, is demanded, is where the opportunity is. But at the same time, they're the same people who, if they act proactively and they demand a seat on the table, we can carve a future for a value chain that is far more prosperous than we all currently are imagining. So those are my last thoughts. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for those final thoughts, July. So in closing then, to the panel, we thank our panel members profusely for their contribution, which was in no measure very significant. I'd like to pick up on a few points, just in summary, and it's clear from the messaging we've had from all our delegates, all our panel members, that until a reliable, new and reasonably priced baseload source of energy is found, coal is going to be required and coal is here to stay. The panel members mentioned, that they see coal being around for quite a few decades to come, and I personally agree with one of the comments was made that there is no expiry date for coal, and coal will be here certainly within all of the lifetimes of the people that's watching this, and I think considerably time to come beyond that. It is a simple fact, as reported by the International Energy Organization, that coal usage is not on the decrease, but is in fact on the increase, and particularly in the emerging economies of the world, the undeveloped world. The narrative that's being propagated that is anti-coal is clearly a developed world narrative, who are certainly, to my view, being misled down this utopian ideal that by going green and using solar and wind energy, everything will be fixed. Well, I say to them, good luck with that, because there's ample evidence to prove that that has not been the case. And I think the real messaging is that we need balance in everything, balance in all things. And the energy mix needs to be balanced. And until we can replace coal as the cheap form of safe and clean energy generation, as we can today by deploying the available technologies, And more to the point that was brought forward by July in his closing comments, we can deal successfully and equally with the social governance fallout from a world which envisages zero coal or zero fossil fuels. I mean, this was a very complex subject and one that clearly has not been thought through by the political elite and the NGOs. It's very easy to make statements about, oh, we won't use coal anymore. But as July pointed out, you know, the social impacts and the employment and contribution to the GDP of many nations in the tens of millions of people will be affected, you know, simply by looking at a zero coal usage. So a lot to absorb, a lot to, I think, propagate. And a very key point that July made is as an industry, as a group of operators and developers, we need to get together more closely, and we need to speak as one voice to get the truth out there and get the balanced view. What coal really is, what coal's contribution really is along the value chain, not only thermal energy generation, but also infrastructure development, the production of materials that are required to build our developed world. Whether it's housing, whether it's industrial facilities, roads, bridges, whatever it is, coal has a role to play, and we need to get that message out to the world. So, and fight against the very well-funded anti-coal lobby. So finally, yeah, thanks very much to everyone who's participated in this. I'd like to thank the organisers for putting this panel together, and to you delegates for attending and listening to this. And yeah, we look forward to further discussions as we move forward into the one-to-one sessions. Certainly the panel delegates will be available for questions and to discuss any issue that you might have. So once again, thank you very much.